Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have everybody here. My name is Neha Gupta. I'm the founder of College Shortcuts. And I am so excited to say I have Arun on the show. And with over 25 years of college admissions experience, including time at the University of Chicago, Caltech, and UCLA, Arun is one of the most respected voices in the field. As a former admissions officer and now an independent educational consultant and past chief academic officer at CollegeWise, he brings deep insight into what truly makes a student stand out and a unique perspective shaped by his own South Asian heritage. So, Arun, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you. So, I want to have just a real deep and honest conversation. I think it's so rare to speak with someone else who's also South Asian background that has been in this space for so long. And, with your experience, one of the things I really want to know from your perspective is what do you think admissions officers really value most today that maybe they didn't value 10, 15, or 20 years ago? And the reason I ask this is because at College Shortcuts, when you do something for so long, and I think in a lot of industries and fields, a lot of times maybe things stay the same. But I have to say, in the college admission space, it's incredible how different things are. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you feel has really changed in the last decade or two in the process?
Right. Well, I can take a very long view of these things, so I will definitely stick kind of this 10 to 20 year time frame. One of the things that really stands out to me is, when I started off in this profession way back in 1994, the dean of admissions at the University of Chicago, my boss, was someone who also taught humanities courses at the University of Chicago. He was interested in talking about Socrates and Aristotle. And that is something you would have found true across many of the highly selective colleges and universities. They would be almost like quasi faculty members who really were connected to the educational experience. What's really, it's really striking to me in the years since, where now, as you look at the deans of admissions and certainly the vice presidents of enrollment management, they more often than not will have MBAs or masters in data science and things of that sort. And so I think that that's dramatically affected the way that, classes are built and applications are reviewed. I think there was a certain softness to the way that the admissions process worked many, many years ago, where, you could find a spot for a kid who you're just like, all right, the grades aren't perfect, the test scores aren't perfect. What the heck happened this semester? And you'd have a spot even at the like Rices and Stanfords and Dukes. I think in this metric driven culture that a lot of admissions offices has become now, it's a lot harder to find, a nook or cranny to kind of squeeze that kind of kid into. And, it's a little bit disappointing, but in some ways it probably, I think people really desperately crave increasingly like clarity, clarity, clarity. And maybe this is a path towards that where you're not looking at kids going like, how did that kid get in there? That happens less and less now. So that feels like one of the most striking things. I think, ironically, in contrast to that, particularly in the last like even preceding, I think, the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, there there was already a movement towards like, gosh, what are these kids doing? They're burning themselves out, right? Like, where's their resilience? Where's their creativity, their curiosity? And there was a lot more increasing focus, I'd say, even 10 years ago on like the social emotional aspects of young people. That's definitely ramped up in the last 5 to 6 years, right? And so I think that, in contrast to the like, data-driven approach that the admissions offices are utilizing in many ways, there's also a little bit of like, gosh, we're not just going to rely on SATs and weighted GPAs to build our classes. We're looking for evidence of other things.
Absolutely. And I would say that, I was reading Jeff Selingo, who spoke at IECA, who I love. I was such a
Yeah.
fangirl when I went up to him and was like, can I have a picture?
Yeah.
But I love his work in the space. And I know that he had shared a lot about his experience working in admissions offices and how they do have to do something called shaping of
Hmm.
the class. And when you talk about, the fact that it's gotten so data driven and that it's become almost just like, okay, we have to have X amount of this, this, and this. Have you seen in your time in this space where students really, in your opinion, should have gotten in that didn't get in?
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of even should have gotten in, I mean, ignores the fact that it's such a massive applicant pool out there for a fixed number of spots. I think, and many of these colleges, Princeton, every few years, Princeton will put out something like, we could have filled our class 3 times over
Oh
with,
yeah.
valedictorians alone, right? And I have to remind people, I think sometimes the people kind of live in bubbles during this process. And like, I live in Los Angeles, you live in Houston. It's very easy for an LA family to be like, okay, I'm competing against the kids at my school and my rival high schools. And it's like, yo, there's great kids in Santa Barbara, San Diego,
New
Sacramento, San
Jersey.
Francisco, Oakland.
Yeah,
That's
everywhere.
just in California, right?
Right.
And then you throw in the international students. And it gets lost on people. I have to remind people, I often do this when I speak at high schools, like, hey, how many high schools do you think there are in the United States? And people are like, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000. There's 28 to 32,000 high schools. So
Oh
if you
God.
just take one kid as being the valedictorian in each of those schools, that's 32,000 valedictorians each year. We know many high schools have multiple kids tying for valedictorian. And the entering class at Harvard each year is 1,900. Like there's no one's entitled to any of these spaces, right? And
Right.
so I have to constantly remind people like this isn't purely a meritocracy. These kids, you talked about shaping the classes. These colleges have to take a close look at like what their needs are. They have to take a look at their budgets. I a few years ago I had a student who got into Yale. She was great, but getting into Yale is it's tough, right? And I had a friend who worked there, and I was like, "Hey, I'm really pleased so and so got in. Share just a little bit more about how she got in there." And like, honestly, all of our harp players were graduating. I was like, "Expand on that." Well, they have multiple endowed fellowships, faculty positions in the harp at Yale, and all the students were graduating. They literally needed harpists, and my student was a harpist. That's not something you can ever build into a list and things of that sort, right? And so,
Boy.
did that kid deserve to get in? Yeah, she academically crushed it, and she's an incredible human being and a successful entrepreneur, and all of those things. But like, if you were to say, did she take the most APs? Did she have the highest SAT? No, but thank goodness Yale looks at a lot more than
Mhm.
just fixed, numbers, which is, I think, the trap that a lot of people fall into.
I also feel like, I mean, my backstory is I was, my parents moved here. All it was about was making, hundreds. That was kind of the story. It was, um, you know, if you can make a 97, you can make 100, was something my dad used to say. And I was pushed into all honors AP. I took so many SAT classes. But, I think we both have some gray hairs and we've lived long enough. From your perspective, when we talk about how there's over 30,000 valedictorians, would you say that the real, I'd actually, before I get into that, I'd like to
Yeah.
hear, what do you consider the real metric for success, especially in this process, in the sense that, yes, there's all these grades and GPAs and APs and SATs, and a lot of this, for some schools, it doesn't always require a lot of critical thinking. It's who has incredible memory and who can regurgitate that memory. And from what I've seen, at least on my end, where yes, we have all of my students typically have perfect GPAs and scores, I don't know if that to me anymore really feels like what stands out in the process at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And and
mean,
and to answer the success question too on that.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is the interesting thing, right? I mean, I think everyone has the right to determine success on their own accounts. I cringe a bit when people link success. My students will kind of laugh after getting into a Princeton or a Stanford, and I'm like, hey, listen, I'm really proud of you for getting in there. But if this ends up being the most interesting thing about you, I'll actually be quite disappointed in the life that you've led, right? And I
Yeah.
think that like there can be such a blind chase for some sort of imaginary idea of like I have to work at this company or go to this law school or make this amount of money or own a
Mhm.
penthouse in this part of Manhattan on this floor that there's a certain emptiness that comes along with that, right? I think I saw that, when the pandemic first kicked in, one of the most striking, fascinating things that happened was, in those earliest weeks, the structure fell away, right? Schools were trying to figure out what was happening. Parents were trying to figure out how to deal with their kids being home and work from home at the same time. And I saw these kids who, there are those kids, and I'll be honest with you, I saw them when I just remember at Caltech, the kids who would run up to me at college fairs and be like, how many hours of community service do I need to get into Caltech? How many APs do I need to take to get into Caltech? And once that structure fell away, right? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Once that fell away, some of my students who are the B plus, A minus students, they were the students who started thriving during the pandemic because they did things out of genuine motivation, out of curiosity, out of compassion versus my straight A kids who thought there was like a formula to execute upon were really like, I don't know what to do without there being like tests to study for every day versus some of my kids were like, this is awesome. I just get to read books on
Mhm.
physics all day long and watch Netflix documentaries on the Greco-Roman wars all day long. Those kids really thrived, right? And so I do think that like this is kind of moving also beyond just like college admissions per se, but like it's part of the reason I think you need to find joy in the things that you're doing. Like I think probably I know in fact because I've watched some of your stuff. Authenticity is a lot of people are like, well, you're just saying that like be true to who you are, be authentic. Well, yeah, because that's the stuff that like theoretically gets you like fired up and excited about, right? And so kids who try to manufacture some illusion of like, I think this is what the colleges want. I'm like, you don't like science. Why are you doing research? You don't like orchestra. Why are you investing so much time in it when you could be doing photography or you could be studying Arabic or a million other things? And so I think we've gotten like kind of disconnected like from just the ideas of like pursuing joy and happiness where all the data, this isn't just my LA hippy dippy view of things, all the data tells us like if you are finding joy in the work that you're doing, you're finding happiness in it, success follows, right? Versus
Yes.
kids arbitrarily like, I must win that competition, that will make me happy. And oftentimes they're just like, okay, what's next? And you hear
Yes,
this
always.
from a lot of the college folks who are just like, I have friends who are professors and they're like, oh my God, unless you tell these kids exactly what to do, they're just like, I don't know, they don't just do stuff for themselves, or a lot of kids don't do stuff just for themselves. So I can't define what success means to each individual kid or family out there. And listen, I'm not someone who doesn't deny that like money and stability plays a role in that, but like, my goodness, I think you can even look in our profession and the number of like former Harvard and Stanford trained lawyers who are like, I hate it practicing law. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know why. I guess I just did it, right? And now they find their joy in doing the kind of work we do, working with high school kids
exactly.
and find their path.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. It makes me think back to when I was at Rice and I was an economics major and I got an internship with Goldman Sachs. And I had
Hmm.
a mentor at the very end who said, hey, in private wealth management, this door is always open for you, Neha. But from what I can tell in the 12 weeks we've had with you, you're an entrepreneur. And I
Yeah.
was like, what? They're like, yeah, you can always come back to this. You're super sharp. Like, you want to
Yeah.
apply for any job, you're going to get it. You have the skills we're looking for. You got the intelligence and everything. And I think that was really powerful for me because I mean, one of my mentors there as well was Heidi Cruz, who later is now very well known, married to Ted Cruz in
Oh,
Texas. You know, and
incredible.
she taught me so many things in terms of like how to present yourself, how to show up, being a female in a very male dominated space, like all these types of things. And I learned so much from that one internship. But I remember thinking to myself about like, what's next? What's next? What's next? Because that's always, you're right, that has always been the focus. But now, and it's interesting, I stumbled across tutoring as a teenager. And then I started tutoring and going to over 1,000 homes myself, tutoring. And then we
Wow.
built into college admissions. And then I had the right mentors to teach me online marketing. And now we're all over the place in terms of college shortcuts. But I mean, I don't feel like I'm working. It's, I've gotten to that point so far into this career. I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't know what else it would look like for me. And this weekend was the first weekend I literally didn't respond to an email for 2 days. And it was hard for me because I'm so used to working and
Yeah.
loving it that it's like, oh, I'm on my phone. I can just respond. Oh, I can handle this. Let me pair the student with this.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how you get you really find so much joy in what you're doing. Um, I'm curious, I know that, at College Wise, you did you were there for how long?
I mean, I was at College Wise for about 20 years.
It's a
Yeah.
really long time. I'm
Hmm.
curious just from the experience of like what it was like 20 years ago versus all the way up. What was that like?
I mean, I think one of the, things I most, 20 years ago, I worked on the admissions side, right? And I take a lot of pride in that. And I have a lot of friends who continue to work in the admissions world. But I remember 20 years ago going to conferences, much like the ones we see each other at. And I'd have friends who almost apologetically would say, "Oh, he's an independent education consultant, but he's one of the good ones." They're like, I distinctly remember having a conversation with my mentor, Ted O'Neill, at the University of Chicago, where I was just like, hey, I'm thinking about going over to the dark side, And I will say, and I think honestly, a lot of the work that my colleague Kevin and I at College Wise did was kind of moving IECs into a more respectable place. And I would say that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, this kind of slow burn that we did from like 2004 to, the pandemic of just,
Wow.
showing up and being, a good citizen within the college admissions community. And, it used to be a thing where people were very hostile to, the kind of work that we did. And now, I'm often partners, I'm always thrilled when a high school invites me, like, hey, come speak, or gosh, we've got this student that we simply don't have the capacity to support. Is this someone that either you or someone would be able to take on and kind of guide through the process? And it's like, yeah, that's incredible. But 20 years ago, that happened a lot less than
Yes.
it does now. I think also there's also reality with just as the costs have increased around going to college, like as a consumer, I mean, when this is going to be almost a $400,000 decision to spend 5, 10, $25,000 working with independent consultant is not that insane, right? Like you've got to make this smart decision, whether it's helping build the list or get into the kind of school that like gets you merit scholarships or whatever the case might be. And so I think there is some value that we have now that perhaps even 20 years ago wasn't quite there. And so, I really love the fact that now there's a lot more like partnership type work
Yes.
going.
More
Like
bridging.
we regularly are invited by colleges to come, attend tours, and we're meeting with deans and directors, not unlike those school counselors do. And, I think that's like pretty powerful in the way that, we're still not writing letters of rec, which I'm totally fine with,
Me
because I think
too.
we have all a biased view of things. But I do love the fact that, we have that ability to kind of, speak to admit, deans and directors and go, so what kinds of students are you looking for here in the upcoming cycle, and they're able to say like, hey, we've added a new, AI program. And so we're definitely going to be looking to get 20 more kids, in that. And, or gosh, our biochem program has gotten so imbalanced now and it's heavily weighted towards girls, or everyone's from the East Coast. We're going to be looking for some West Coast kids. And that's the kind of information that didn't used to readily be available to us. But I think for those who are like me and you who are engaged in the profession, we have access to that kind of information.
Absolutely. And I'm curious in this process, and I know both of us being South Asian, which I have to say, when I first went to the conference, I thought we'd all be South Asian in this profession. And I was really shocked actually to find out that most independent educational consultants aren't South Asian. But I think what I realized was because so many of the students I typically work with, I tend to attract students that look like me, that, are STEM majors and that are like really high achieving students. One of the most challenging parts to it, I've realized, is I think that a lot of these South Asian students personally are falling through the cracks. One of the things that I have been really kind of getting passionate about and talking with other IECs that are of Asian background are kind of speaking and creating a voice around that specifically in that experience. I do feel after the Harvard case recently in the last few
Mhm.
years, there's been more conversation around this. You've been in this a very long time. I'm curious from your perspective, from the South Asian perspective, and for South Asian students, what have you seen from when you started to what we're seeing today? Because
Right.
from my perspective of doing this for a long time, I think admissions was significantly easier 15 years ago, and what was required was really much something more of well-rounded clubs at school counted, and much more not totally relaxed, but today, we're consistently iterating college shortcuts to have internship opportunities, research papers, finding the right summer program. So it's really becoming, in my opinion, when I hear about what my dad and mom went through of you needed to pick your major in high school, which sounded foreign to me at the
Yeah.
time. Now it's become the norm here in order to stand out. So I'm
Yeah.
curious from your perspective, obviously there's a madness to it. And I do think it's gotten more and more different and a little more intense than what it was in the past. But give me your perspective as a South Asian IEC
Yep.
who has done this and you've scaled to a very large degree. I'm sure a section, possibly majority, of students you worked with were South Asian as well.
Interestingly enough, no, not a majority.
Okay.
Maybe by virtue of being in Los Angeles, and I also work with a lot of international families as well, which Europe and Hong Kong, Singapore. So changes the nature of my demographic. But obviously, I've been doing this long enough, working with a lot of South Asian families. I mean, I think like where I would kind of broaden it a little bit is also just around the immigrant aspect. I've been doing this long enough to kind of see the version of I'm the child of immigrants, and the behavior there is different than immigrant kids kids
Yes.
who move here themselves. So I think even just as we think about the South Asian Indian communities, the behavior patterns can be a little bit different. And I do remember years ago, every kid wanted to be a doctor or an engineer. And now I'm slightly heartened in that computer science has been added, and now finance has been added, and management consultant has been added, right? But
Right.
at the same time, I will say that, like, for the children of people like me, I see their kids pursuing things like, trying to become the conductors of orchestra, trying to become poets, trying to become, public policy experts and things of that sort. So I do think that there is like kind of a cracking through. Here are the only possibilities. I get where it comes from. I mean, parents love their children, right? So I don't disagree with parents who are like, my kid has to become a doctor or an engineer in order to be successful, right? Because it's a path you're familiar with. It's how the visa system was set up to even bring my dad, who was a doctor here, that's how the system was brought up. He knew that being a doctor was a path forward. It worked for him. It should work for his kids. Ironically, none of us became doctors. Okay, he's okay with that. And so I think there's this world where, when we talk about like falling through the cracks, I think one of the things that I worry about within the South Asian community is you do have a lot of, some of the work that I also do, I'm on the board of a nonprofit here in Southern California called Jiva, and we're focused on destigmatizing mental health issues and
Mm,
within the South Asian community. And
yes.
one of the things that's so striking is how many panelists we have who are former doctors and lawyers who have left that world behind, right? They went through it at a high level and found themselves in their late 20s, early 30s. I never wanted to be a doctor. Like, I loved this
Uh,
other thing and finding that second life. And it's a little heartbreaking because it's kind of like you knew that you loved that when you were 16, 17, 18.
yes.
You could have jump started it, but obviously some of the
So,
language in our community doesn't
yeah.
always.
I mean, Arun, I'll tell you when
Yeah,
I was supposed to be the Goldman Sachs executive, right? Like, or something in finance,
I
or
did the Merrill Lynch
yeah,
internship.
right. Or McKinsey or bust, right? Like that was kind of the only thought process. And I remember when I first started my tutoring company, I had Indian aunties being like, aren't you considered the help beta when you go into the house?
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating.
And it took A few years, but I remember when I started to become very successful, all of a sudden it was like, wow, look at Neha. She's one of the top agencies in Houston. All of a
Yeah.
sudden the story changed. So
Right.
I think that when you're young and yes, you found something you love, like which I found I knew at a young age I was meant to work with kids. I knew that.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
you get steered off that path because it doesn't make sense financially or etc. Well, it can if you do it right.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
two, I mean, there's multiple billion-dollar education companies out there, right? So it's just what happens is you're right. People try to stay on that safe path.
Yep.
You think that's
Yep.
what it is. I love the fact that you talked about there's a difference between the South Asian student whose parents just moved here and they have a 15-year-old versus the parents that are 40s and 50s that are having teenagers today. The
Yep.
conversation is completely different.
The
I
pressures are different. Yeah.
completely, I have I've got the South Asian parent that's from India who's like, I moved here for you. It's Stanford or bust.
Hmm.
And I've
Hmm.
got the South Asian parent who's in their 40s or 50s that went through the system and they're actually clueless that it's changed so much. So like, why is this so hard? Like
Yeah.
I got into Cornell like in the
Yeah.
90s and it was
Yeah.
I go, let me tell you the acceptance rate then versus today, right?
Yep.
But then what ends up happening is I've noticed their values are totally different. I want my kid to be happy. I want them to
Right.
be healthy.
Yep.
I want to make sure they're in an environment where, hey, I'm going to teach them, hey, if you end up in these kinds of situations in college around drinking and drugs, let's talk about it, right? There's an openness in this conversation, and I'm glad that that behavior is shifted. Um, but I do feel that the pressure in a culture where stability and prestige is so prioritized, how do you help to kind of, explore the concepts of, so in my opinion, success is different. It is not just a GPA or test score. It's about, how are you able to be resilient, have grit? Are you elegant, eloquent? Are you able to be creative, ambitious? Are you proactive? That's a
Yeah.
big issue I see. Can you write well? Do
Yep.
you know how to pitch yourself in under a minute? These
Yep.
to me are actually the skills that are going to matter, especially in a world where AI is going to be dominating in a lot of different ways. So, as someone who else also works in this field, how do you focus in on these skills? Because we know, as two people in the space, that those are actually what colleges are actually looking for
Yep.
instead of just the 4.0 1600.
Right. Well, I think some of it is you highlight a lot of the thing. I agree with you around the communication skills, for example. Like the number of boys where I'm like, dude, you got to learn how to write. This is just you're as just a human being. You're never gonna know how to like ask a girl out to prom or on a date if you don't know how to like emote, right? Your emotions and whatnot. So I think communication skills are super important. But I also think something, kindness and compassion. I think that that's something that's so lost, right? I kind of joked about how many community service hours do I need, right? Like that's not the way to think about community service, right? Like for a community that, and this isn't true of everyone, but for, a community that like when we look at the data, we have the highest number of people with advanced degrees, we have the highest average salary, the highest literacy. How are we taking this privilege, that this success that we've taken, and how are we doing it? What are we doing to make the world around us a better place, right? If it's simply like reinvesting it in more tutors and becoming presidents of more clubs and things like that, that's very different than your kid getting out. I talk a lot about encouraging my kids to like break out of these bubbles, go engage with the city around you. The parents who are like, oh my God, there's this incredible opportunity to go help build homes in Thailand. And I'm like, you can do that right here in Los Angeles, right? You don't have to go
Yeah,
halfway across the world to serve homeless people, right? You can do it
yeah,
right here locally. And
especially in LA.
yeah, particularly in LA. I think also, I have to remind, again, going back to this idea of a formula, and I get it because, particularly if you come from India, it's a test that gets you into the colleges, a test combined with what you want to study that kind of predicts your path in a lot of ways. And if you carry that idea of that's what the admissions process is like here, I get why you might be resistant to the ideas of compassion and kindness and curiosity. But Yo, you're in a Western stylized individualistic system, and you have to kind of your child has to move through the world in that way as well. And there can be this, I'm a huge sports junkie, and I became obsessed with the Olympics, sprinting in particular, and I started, and it's fascinating to like run this 100-yard race. They know exactly how many steps they're going to take. They know exactly how quickly they have to get out of the blocks. And every single stage of it is just, it's absolutely
Mhm.
a formula to win a
Yeah,
gold medal, right? They each set up an individual plan. That is not life. That is not college admissions. The contrast I would make is parkour, where kids, you're bouncing around, you're finding new paths, you're having to like weave around things. And it breaks my heart a bit. Like some of these kids have no idea how to not move off, taking 17 steps, moving straight forward for 100 yards, right? If there is a single thing that throws them off, they're like, I don't know what to do now, right? And I think it's really critical that parents, particularly South Asian parents, like encourage their kids to take some risks. Like my most interesting kids are the ones who have failed a few
of
times,
course.
right?
Oh yeah.
The kids who fail for the first time in the admissions process, you've experienced this, you're like, come on, you should have like known what it was like to have someone say no to you a long time ago, right?
Yeah, but a lot of them feel that the problem with that is a lot of them feel this like you said, it's a bubble. I'm at the top of my class.
Yep.
These are not reach schools for me.
Yeah, and they're wrong. They're not reading the data. They're going in with biases. Like it's fascinating where I have super successful parents who clearly understand how data works, who
Yeah.
then create these little exceptions for themselves. Well, yes, I understand, but that you're not talking about me. I'm like, absolutely, I'm talking about you, right? And if I'm also to
Yeah.
go further, this formula thing kind of replicates itself where we have a history in our community of being really good at spelling bees or chess or tennis or classical dance. And then you'll meet the kids who truly love it. And when they talk about it, they write about it, that joy manifests itself. And then you have the kids who I'm like, why do you play tennis? They're just like, I don't know. I heard you had to play a sport. And it's like, what? you know,
Yeah.
and it's just this grind. And I asked them, what would you rather be doing? And they have a litany of other things. But then I talk to their parents, and their parents are like, yeah, but you have to have a sport. I'm like, no, your kid loves writing. It's totally fine to go off and like be part of the
Exactly.
literary journal, right? And so often the mistake people make is this incredible GPA plus this incredible SAT. How is my kid not getting into like Rice and Northwestern and Duke? Like, well, because there's 73 other kids from your particular zip code who followed the exact same formula, right? And you would have benefited from, again, the authenticity, kind of pursuing the things that like seem interesting and exciting for you. And I think that's some of the good work that we can do, particularly when we get to work with younger students of like, I mean, listen, if you're not deeply passionate about AI, it's not like the world needs another South Asian kid who is trying to like fake their love of computer science, right? If what you
Right.
really love is American history or mathematics, wonderful. Pursue that and figure out ways to go deeper into those things that you already love instead of trying to like fake it till you make it, right? Because
Yeah.
I think nowadays, admissions officers, like, we can talk about AI all we want, and certainly admissions offices are going to use it increasingly. But fundamentally, for the next 5 to 10 years, the decisions classes are going to be shaped by humans going, what are our needs?
Mhm.
What do we need more of? And so much of that comes out in the essays, the interviews, the activities kids pursue, the way they talk about it. And,
Yeah.
I kind of cringe when another family is like, we want to do a BAMD program, right? And you're like, all right, cool. Tell me why. And they're just like, I want to help people. All right, there are a million ways you can help people. Dig in. And the kid's just blank faced at me. And I can tell right there, like, this is,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah. I had a student once. I said, "Why do you want to go into finance?" And he goes, "I want to make a lot of money." I
mhm.
was like, "Yeah, you're gonna get
Yeah.
rejected for every interview for that answer."
Yeah, exactly. Versus the kids who can,
I'm like, that may have worked elsewhere. It just doesn't work here. And I think you're totally right. Like, I think what happens is so many people are focused on a formula, not realizing like they're looking for the kids, in my opinion, and I want to take a minute before I get into that, but I remember when I was doing this 15 years ago, before our focus was just the application process.
Yeah.
And I remember it was interesting. I was in my Google Drive recently and I was looking at for a brochure and it was
Hmm.
like this peak performance program with college shortcuts at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like I had this brochure and I could not explain to
Yeah.
parents what this was, what I was trying to do, because I saw that so many of my kids were struggling because they didn't have the right profile. And I'd say 15 years ago, this concept of starting in eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th grade it probably existed, but it
Yeah.
wasn't something that was like, and I would love to hear your points on it because you were in it
Yeah.
too. It wasn't something that was like readily thought of, as in
Hmm.
today. You
Yeah.
can literally talk to a parent and say, if you're in 10th grade and you haven't figured out XYZ, you're actually behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
The narrative has changed that if you haven't really thought about high school as ninth, 10th, and 11th, 12th is like out the window, and you've got
Yeah.
these 3 years to create impact and build your profile. My
Yeah.
mentorship program, we are continually iterating and building better solutions on that as the admissions process changes. I'm curious from your perspective. I get some parents that'll say things like, oh, we've got time,
Yeah.
or when are we just going to let kids be kids? Like, why do we
Right.
have to do this?
Yeah.
And then they're surprised at the result later.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that like let kids be kids can work in one of two ways. I think sometimes that can be an excuse for we don't want to put a whole lot of thought into it. We don't want to hold our child accountable, to standards that we kind of determine or goals that we set. But I also think about the like a few years ago, I had a kid who honestly, the mom sent me a picture of their backyard,
Okay.
and the backyard was completely just destroyed. There were just holes everywhere. And I was like, what's going on here? Why are there just holes in the backyard? She's like, well, my husband and I just decided let the kids years ago just dig what they want to dig. And these kids would have days where they would like try to dig their way to India, and then there'd be days where they would dig and try to make their own swimming pool. And, it was such a reminder. There's a fantastic podcast that Ezra Klein is a New York Times, writer, and he did a podcast with Alison Gopnik, who is a professor at Berkeley, and they talk about the idea of play. And one of the really striking things around childhood play is if you give a box to a 15-year-old, like a cardboard box to a 15-year-old, they would look at that box and be like, you put things inside this box. If you give that same box to a 5-year-old,
Mhm.
the 5-year-old is like, this is a rocket ship. This is an F1 car. This
Right.
is a cave. This is
This
my
is a hat.
castle, right? Who do you want? As a college, you're way more excited about that 5-year-old's
Right.
ingenuity, creativity, imagination for possibilities than this is a box, right?
Yeah.
And we lose something when you just predetermine everything, which is why she talks a lot about this idea of I've often talked about going wide and going deep, constantly being out there trying new things. She talks about exploring, the importance of people continuing to explore. And I think you and I know that even as adults, relatively well-adjusted adults, like we keep finding new things that excite us and you want to kind of keep dabbling in it. But then you also find tremendous joy and frankly success by going deeper. So she talks about exploiting. So here's these things that you're good at. How can you go deeper and deeper and deeper, right? And that's been part of the cool. People are like, man, I'm amazed you've been in this profession so long. And I'm like, yeah, but I can endlessly, there used to be a world
Totally.
where it was just about how can I help kids write better essays? But now I'm reading child development. I'm looking at data science. Now, of course, to understand what's going on in college admissions, I have to pay attention to like public policy and funding issues at the federal level, et cetera, right? That's the exploiting, but it's also the exploring. Like I'm getting a chance to like,
It's fun.
and yeah, exactly. And kids need to be doing that. And parents don't often, particularly South Asian parents, just look at like, well, Raj Gupta did this to get into Duke last year. You do the same as Raj.
Right.
Absolutely not, because
Yeah.
Raj loved those things he was doing, or
Yes.
on some level
Hopefully.
connected with it, hopefully. Um, and I've just found that like over and over. I think about the kid I had a few years ago who he actually just finished up at Harvard, but there was a summer he applied to all these prestigious science programs and he got in. And in the end, he's like, his parents had gifted him for his 16th birthday a really nice DSLR camera,
Hmm.
and he loved astronomy. And he basically ended up taking a job at like a local college university, kind of working in their laboratory, nothing prestigious in any way. And then almost every night, he would hike up this like local mountain with his camera gear, a few of his friends, and they would just dabble in astrophotography. And
Wow.
throughout it, and this kid, perfect grades, perfect test scores, he was winning every award. And he and these guys would just sit around and they would talk about girls and they would talk about the NFL and they would talk about their goals and their dreams. This kid, he was incredible. And it was so organic. It wasn't something he was just like, I really want to learn astrophotography. Can I do this? I don't care if I don't get into Berkeley or Princeton or Yale. And then he ends up getting into Harvard because he truly just did stuff for himself
Right.
first. And then
Yes.
organically, the outgrowth of that was like admissions officers going, we want
Yeah.
that kid.
It's so hard to manufacture that level of joy, authenticity, and interest. And I think the part where you shared about like accountability, I think like, yes, kids can be kids, but the other part to it is one of the things I see often is students will say, I don't really know what I want to do. I don't really know. I don't really know. And you hear this ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade.
Yeah,
And then this parent's about to drop over $300,000 into
yeah,
you. And I don't know is a luxurious answer. I
yeah,
sometimes say
yeah,
to parents, I was like, sometimes I'll say to the dads and moms, like, wouldn't it be nice if you could take a year off and say, I
yeah,
don't know, and everyone else deals with the finances of this house and you just get to hang out?
yeah,
It really quickly puts into perspective of, oh my gosh, my kid has more power in their pocket. They have access to Coursera, edX, free resources, YouTube University.
yeah,
There's so much available that to me, I feel like that I don't know is not, oh, kids being kids. It's just
yeah,
a choice to not figure out what your passion is. And I really do believe it takes a lot of time to not only
yeah,
build a profile for college, but to actually like really, as you said, like figure out the width and the depth there of like what is it that truly lights you up? That's
yeah.
not something that just hits you over the head.
Yeah. But I will say in contrast, like I do think there's a difference between like there's a difference between like I don't know versus I don't know. I love politics, philosophy,
That's
and
clear.
physics. And I'm going to use the core curriculum to help me figure this out. I'm going to use the advisors. I'm going to use summer internships. Like I
That's proactiveness, Arun. I don't always hear that. Yeah,
yeah, I
that's
think
different.
yeah, the like kind of shrugging, the being disengaged is a little
Yeah,
like, and listen, I get it. I think this is like a little bit of the social media world and the attachment to digital devices. I don't want to sound like the old guy, but like we talked about communication. There's just a lot of kids who they're not talking with each other. I think part of that, even I think central to that story about the boy who was hauling his gear up a mountain was like him and his boys spending
right,
time talking about who they are and who they wanted to be and using college as, that's part of the dot, but it's one of the like steps in between, but it's not the only step. Like kids who kind of just look at like the top of the mountain being getting into X college are the kids honestly who struggle a bit, right? Versus the kids who are just like, oh yeah, yeah, I definitely want to go to this school, but it is a just one step of many to get to
right.
like my ultimate goal, right? And I think there's like a lot of kids who lack vision in some ways. I spend a lot of time talking to kids about vision and values, and like identifying like not what job you want, but like, hey, I want a job where I can impact this community, or I can
Yeah,
really like, really dig into this part of who I am. And that could lead them to medicine, right? Like, hey, I'm like really fascinated by research, and medicine is a pathway to explore that. Like, original scholarship is something that fires me up. And then you can have this other kid who's just like, oh my God, the ability, like the doctor who took care of my mother, that is my idol. The way that she just like made this very dark space, like brought so much light into it. Well, that's another way to be a doctor, right? But just
Yeah,
saying, I want to be a doctor to help people,
totally.
that's vague,
For any of us
right?
that have ever experienced bad medical care versus amazing medical care,
Yes.
right? I
Yes.
think at
Yes.
a certain age, you have unfortunately had this type of experience.
Right.
I think about those types of experiences when I am working with my students and saying, hey, like, yeah, you've got the intelligence to be a doctor, but do you have the emotional intelligence? Do you know what it's like? Do you know how to
Right.
handle this properly? And I agree with you. There's so much more on that soft skills,
Yeah.
outside of just being intelligent that really
Yeah.
makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I'll be even more critical. This is like it's sometimes hard for the South Asian community here, Indian parents to hear, but like when everyone just does what Raj Gupta did,
Yeah.
right? Everyone ends up kind of looking the same. And to the admissions office, so when I hear the frustrations of like, how did that kid get in? And my kid took three more APs and had this man. Well, I'll be honest with you, that other kid was a lot more interesting. They
Yeah.
seem like someone who's willing to march to the your kid just is just doing this blindly and then will
Copy
need another
paste.
formula to be successful, right?
Yeah.
You've
I
given no
actually
indication that they're light on their feet. They look like a kid who just wants to run a 100-meter sprint versus really get out there and bounce around and explore and, be willing to fail a little bit and learn from it and then grow from it, right? I even with the mental health care work that I do, like you can see like I mean, the data shows like suicide rates amongst
very high.
Asians, it's literally an epidemic, right? Because we don't let kids be themselves, right? It's just this formula, formula, formula. And then kids are terrified. They love their parents. They want to please their parents, right? And then and you just end up with there's a lot of love there, but it's
So
misguided in
funny.
the way that we like encourage kids and parents to kind of
Yeah.
channel it, right? So that's the value I hope of this honest conversation that we're having.
Agreed. And I even tell families, look, if you saw the inside of college shortcuts and every assessment form that we see and the number of extracurriculars that are all the same, and when I list them out and I ask them in your communities for these activities, are they mostly all South Asian families in those activities? They
Yeah.
start to laugh. And I'm
Yep.
like, to be honest, it's actually not that funny because
Yeah.
you're thinking, okay, my kid's spending 20 hours towards this,
Yeah.
tennis, piano, karate, DECA, HOSA, FBLA, robotics, right? Like I can list them so easily now because it's all they ever do. And then
Yeah.
they really struggle with showing up in a way that's different or unique.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm really glad we had this conversation. It's so great to have you on, Arun. I mean,
Thanks.
I had such a great time with you at the IECA conference, and I just felt like, it's so rare to meet another person who looks like me in this space,
Right.
that's able to kind of
A lot more gray hair, but yes.
well, I mean, it's
No, yeah.
hiding, but it's there. A lot of my family has a lot of opinions about why I grew that out, but hey, I'm a trendsetter. So it's so awesome to chat with you about this and really kind of speak to the South Asian student, and the South Asian background, but also just overall about childhood development, how we're in the college admission space. To me, I feel like, this is a very important section of a child's life. I was very misunderstood, it felt during that time. And so
Right.
I really try to create programs and ways for our students to feel, hey, you're not never alone. There's always something and someone here. And if they don't let you in, who cares? Move on. That a door shut means 10 doors open.
Yeah.
So it's really great to speak with you, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining today. And I know that if a family is watching, they're absolutely going to learn so much from this conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you for the great work that you're doing in the community, Neha.
Absolutely.